Welcome to Ground Truth. Join Sam Faddis as he looks for truth from those on the ground, in the middle of the action with key insights regarding critical national and international issues. Listen for discussions and interviews on national security, terrorism, politics, espionage, the paranormal, and weapons of mass destruction.
Welcome, I'm Sam Faddis, and this is Ground Truth. And today we're going to be talking about guns, and maybe more than guns, we're going to be talking about gun rights and the Second Amendment sanctuary movement that is really kind of sweeping this country. And with us, graciously giving us some time, Val Finnell, who is with the Gun Owners of America, and I believe is their Pennsylvania director. Val, welcome.
Hey, it's great to be on the show, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Val, thanks for making the time. So you're the Pennsylvania director, but you're actually down in Virginia, is that right?
No, I live in Allegheny County.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yes, I'm a native son of Pennsylvania, retired Air Force colonel, and came back home after retired from the military.
So you're from Allegheny County originally?
Yes.
All right. Well, you know where Greene County is.
Yes, I do.
All right. Well, that's where my dad's entire family is from.
All right.
Where you, long before you get to the West Virginia line, it is West Virginia. And I say that in the most affectionate way possible. But yeah, my dad's from Waynesburg. Anyway, let's talk. First of all, let's just start with this. You're with Gun Owners of America. So what is that? What do you guys do?
Gun Owners of America is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. That's a quote from Ron Paul. We have been around since 1975. We're one of the most aggressive, if not the most aggressive, organization nationwide to protect the Second Amendment rights of all Americans. And we also have some state programs, and that's where I come in. I'm the state director for Pennsylvania. So I'm in charge of, doing things in PA, monitoring legislation, trying to get pro-gun bills passed, fighting anti-gun bills, the usual. And lately, we've been moving into the Second Amendment sanctuary ordinance movement here in PA, and that's what I've been doing mostly now for the last couple of months.
So when you use the terminology no compromise, what's that mean? How does that translate?
Well, we don't accept any gun control. We believe what the Second Amendment really says what it means, that it shall not be infringed. And in Pennsylvania, we have Article 1, Section 21 of the Constitution, that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be questioned. We really take that at face value. We don't accept any gun control. We don't accept gun control light. And we fought just about every gun control law since we've been around, since 1975. And on the pro-gun side, we're trying to really advance the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And on the pro-gun side, we have the Second Amendment sanctuary stuff, but we also are trying to get constitutional carry passed in a lot of states, which means you can carry without a permit.
So one of the things that strikes me about this, I want to kind of focus in on the so-called Second Amendment sanctuary movement that's out there in a minute. But before we go that direction, one of the things that strikes me about the entire discussion of the Second Amendment is the extent to which it seems a lot of people don't understand. This is my opinion. Don't understand that what we're talking about is a right to keep and bear arms. This gets diluted, again, my opinion, to this idea that, you can kind of have a gun in your closet for home defense, or maybe it's okay to go to a shooting club and shoot or go deer hunting. But that somehow or another, again, my terminology, it gets watered down to these kind of things that sound a lot more like privileges than they sound like rights. And also don't really go at all to what to me has always struck me as the core of the Second Amendment, which doesn't say anything about hunting or self-defense. It clearly goes to resisting governmental authority is what you're talking about when you start talking about things like a militia. Your comments or your thoughts?
Sam, I think you're spot on about that. That's exactly right. The Second Amendment isn't about duck hunting. It isn't even solely about being able to defend yourself in the home, which it clearly is. Mm-hmm. But it really is. It is about the bulwark against tyranny. And we often refer to the Second Amendment as liberty's teeth, and we strongly believe that if the Second Amendment falls, or if our rights to keep and bear arms are infringed upon, then the rest of our rights, enumerated in the Bill of Rights, not granted by the Bill of Rights, but protected by the Bill of Rights, would also be compromised. So that's why we aggressively defend the Second Amendment.
Yeah, I love that terminology because I think that's exactly what you're talking about when you talk about it being the teeth. Because the guys, we sometimes, I think, look back on this period of the Revolutionary War and the beginning of the country and so forth, and all we're looking at is a bunch of pictures of old guys in white wigs, and it begins to be somehow transformed into this genteel, kinder, gentler time, when in fact we're talking about individuals who wrote all of these documents, having just gone through a very bloody, very protracted fight against tyranny who understood exactly what the hell it was they were concerned about, because they had to face down this monster, if you will, and fight to survive, and they knew just how harsh the world was. So they weren't sitting around in drawing rooms all the time posing for portraits. They all spent a large portion of their lives trying to avoid being hung by the king. And it brings us back to this issue of the Second Amendment. So let's talk about the so-called Second Amendment sanctuary movement. I'll use that terminology, whether for good or for bad, because that's what's out in the press. What is this all about now?
Well, Second Amendment sanctuaries, started out west. Some say that it was a county in Illinois that was first passed, but largely the movement got started when red flag gun confiscation orders were being passed, and there was resistance to that from sheriffs and their local law enforcement officials and county officials that said, hey, we believe these laws are unconstitutional, they violate due process rights, they put citizens at risk, they put law enforcement officers at risk, and we're not going to enforce them. And in response to that, various counties and even lower levels of government, municipalities have passed resolutions for the most part saying that we affirm the Second Amendment. We're not a Second Amendment or whatever state provision in the Constitution in their states, and we're not going to enforce these laws in our jurisdiction, nor are we going to spend any funds and resources on it. So it's those local officials that are standing in the gap between their citizens and an oppressive state government or the federal government. And at last count, this has really been sweeping across the country. On January 7th, there are 418 counties, cities, and towns that have passed, we call them SASOs, which stands for Second Amendment Sanctuary Ordinances. And that's in 21 separate states. And then Illinois, Colorado, New Mexico, Washington, and Virginia now have passed them in the majority of their counties. So this is really sweeping across the country. Citizens are letting their local government know that they want them to stand in the gap and protect their constitutional rights against encroachment. So most recently in Virginia, this has been in the news. There's a couple of nuances about this. First, the Second Amendment sanctuary ordinance movement, most of the places have passed resolution. And while these are certainly well-intentioned, resolutions don't really have much legal effect. They're just really statements. It could be that some of these counties in Virginia do follow through and don't enforce the laws. But GOA saw this as somewhat of a deficiency. So we created an ordinance which carries the force of law that a locality like a county or municipality could pass that actually defines what the unlawful acts are, penalties for violating the ordinance and violating the constitutional rights of citizens are in there. So it actually has teeth. So we've been really pushing that nationwide to try to get this passed. And I've been out to testify at Marshall County, Kentucky, and we have multiple places in PA now. In every county in Pennsylvania, we have people, volunteers on the ground, working to get the ordinance passed. As far as which counties in PA now have actually passed it, well, Bradford County has passed a resolution. Again, it's not our ordinance, so we're trying to get them to adopt the ordinance. And there are multiple other places right now in Pennsylvania that are considering our ordinance.
So I think a lot of times in the press, such as it is these days, we end up with this almost equation or conflation of sanctuaries in the sense of what you're talking about right now, Second Amendment sanctuaries, and the movement at the other end of the political spectrum that's been around for some time, which is sanctuary cities in the sense of illegal immigration and protecting illegal immigrants. And it's another one of these points at which I feel like this is grotesque distortion and misrepresentation. I mean, saying you're not going to comply with federal law and cooperate with law enforcement against people who have affirmatively broken the law and come into our country illegally strikes me as a completely different thing from saying I'm going to insist upon my rights, which were enshrined, as you say, not given to me, but protected by the Constitution, by the Bill of Rights. Two dramatically different things in my estimation.
Yes.
So the Second Amendment sanctuary movement getting a lot of attention right now. Why now? As you say, it's been around for some time. What is the impetus? Particularly, let's focus on Virginia because it's commanded so much attention recently. Why all of a sudden?
Yeah. Just say yes, absolutely. I think as far as our interest in Pennsylvania, Virginia's not too far away. We're seeing what's happening there when the legislature flipped, and we have a bunch of leftists that are running the state, including Governor Blackface. And no sooner the ink had dried on the election results than they pre-filed bills in the legislature, all kinds of draconian gun control legislation, gun confiscation orders, bans, registration, and they are fast-tracking them. So we've seen a response. We've seen a reaction to that through passing these sanctuary ordinances or resolutions. I think most are resolutions throughout Virginia. So, and I was in Virginia for the rally last week. I don't know how many people, 20, 30,000, maybe more. It was a completely peaceful event. But there was a strong showing of Second Amendment supporters from all walks of life. Black, white, different people, Democrats, liberals were there. Anyone who supported the Second Amendment was there. And it's really a nonpartisan issue, in my opinion. It's a fundamental human right. So that's what's getting it fueled, is people here, I think here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, are seeing what happened in Virginia and saying, hey, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen in 2021. This is one way that we can protect our rights if the similar thing happens. Now, this is not to say that we're going to ignore what's happening in the legislature. That is certainly not true. You know, GOA, as a state director, we've been pushing hard for pro-gun bills in the legislature and testifying and defeating the anti-gun bills. But this one component is, hey, if this happens, we want to be ready. We don't want to be scrambling like they are in Virginia right now.
So let's drill down on that just a little bit. You talk about fast-tracking bills. What are the bills? What exactly, concretely, are we talking about that is being pushed?
Well, there's a number of them in Virginia. I mean, there's probably too many, but basically the ones that are, I think, concerning people the most are, there was an assault weapons ban that was put forward almost immediately. They backed away from that, and now they're going to have, they say, just the registration. But any gun owner can see through that. Registration is a gateway to confiscation. The only reason to register firearms is to confiscate them later. And the anti-gunners will tell you, oh, no, that's never happened in the United States. Well, it has. It happened in New York. They registered firearms, you know, in I think it was 1960s, and in 1991 they finally used that registration list to start confiscating guns in New York City. They even raided somebody's home, and most recently we've seen this happen in New Zealand. So the only reason for registration is confiscation. So gun bans, registration of firearms, and then, of course, red flag gun confiscation orders where there's no due process. Someone accuses you, an angry ex, they go to court ex parte, which means you don't have a right to confront your accuser. They go to the judge issues a red flag, and the cops show up at your door at 5 in the morning and take your guns, which, if you remember, was fatal for Mr. Gary Willis in Maryland, who was shot to death from an execution of a red flag gun confiscation order. And I have to commend our sheriffs. Most of our sheriffs, I believe, in Pennsylvania are against these red flag gun confiscation orders. And throughout the country, I think most of the law enforcement rank and file is with us on this. So these are things that we say that these are a violation of our Fourth Amendment rights, our right to be secure in our persons, our right to confront our accusers. All these basic constitutional rights have been turned on their head. So these things have fueled the movement in Virginia. But I think if I had to point to three things, it would be those. It would be gun bans, registration, the magazine restrictions go along with that, and red flags.
Right. So on the red flag issue, because I just want to make sure I'm clear on what you said and my own understanding of this. Personally, I mean, I agree with everything you just said, quite frankly, but this issue I find really disturbing, and it bothers me tremendously that it doesn't seem that people have really seized on this. What you have is a law, if one of these things is in place, where somebody goes and makes an accusation against you that in some way you are a danger because you have firearms. And we go from this to legal authority to confiscate your firearms. And now after the fact, if you are given any procedure at all, it will be after the fact in an attempt to sort of clear your name and retrieve your firearms. So to me seems as if we have stepped through the looking glass in terms of anything that concerns due process as we know it in this country. You are presumed guilty, action is taken, and now to the extent you have any right, I don't even know that that's the correct term to use in that context, right. It's all right. After the fact you have to clear your name and prove yourself innocent, in effect. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. It's an inversion of due process that we've gone down this path. So now you're faced with if a red flag is executed against you, you have to go to court, spend $10,000 on an attorney to try to get your rights back. And there have been significant delays in a lot of other states getting those firearms back. GOA is very strong on this about opposing red flags. If someone is going to lose their constitutional right, they actually have to go to court. There has to be a hearing. There has to be a right to confront your accuser. All these things have to be in place. That is true due process. It's a true perversion of due process to say that we're going to take them away first and then, you have your quote-unquote due process rights or to try to get them back later. That's repugnant to the Constitution, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, and again, back to the kind of the point of origin of this conversation where we started, the Second Amendment, as you, I think, pretty elegantly put it, is the Bill of Rights does not really grant us rights. The Bill of Rights, if you will, enshrines and protects pre-existing rights. But however we're going to put that, it ain't a privilege. It isn't something the government decided out of the goodness of their heart that it was okay for us to have. That's not what a right is. This is our right protected, and we retain that right. So how can the government then take away that right to possess that firearm that's in the Constitution and in the process ignore all due process, ignore any kind of proceedings, start with the assumption that they have the right anytime they want to take that right away from you, be kind of like functionally, legally. And this is the skeleton in my closet, of course, I'm also an attorney. Would anybody presume that you had the right to pass such a law and tell you could no longer speak, or you could no longer practice your religion, or you no longer had the right against unlawful search and seizure, all of which are equivalent rights in the Bill of Rights? I don't even understand how we started down this road of thinking this could possibly be legal.
I agree 100%. And as you know, the technical term for all of this is those rights are anterior to government. They're, as Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence, we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so these rights come from God, and that's a game changer. And the Second Amendment sanctuary ordinance movement that GOA supports goes to this idea of the doctrine of interposition, or the doctrine of the lesser magistrate. And it shows up in the Virginia and Kentucky resolution that when they were putting the Union together, the states could resist and not enforce unconstitutional laws. And if you go back into the history of our country, right, the Declaration itself is a doctrine, is an interposition document. It's saying Crown has violated our rights, our natural rights as citizens or as people, and our common law rights that were under British law, and that's intolerable. So this is not a legal argument. There was no legal, quote-unquote, legal justification for the American Revolution. It was an appeal to the natural right of human beings, not only for self-determination, but for the right to be secure in their persons, to protect themselves, everything that's in the Bill of Rights. And so the Second Amendment sanctuary ordinance movement upholds this ancient legal tradition of the doctrine of a lesser magistrate. This is what the nobles did on the field of Runnymede when they forced King John to sign the Magna Carta, when they forced the tyrant king to sign the Magna Carta. They were appealing to the natural law. They were appealing to the laws, the God-given rights people had, and the king was violating that. And they went against the king at a time when the king had divine right, had complete power. So this is what we're doing with the Second Amendment sanctuary. We're saying this is, if the statutory law conflicts with the Constitution, the local municipality or the county, whoever adopts it, has no duty of obedience, no duty to obey that law, because they're sworn to uphold the higher law of the Constitution. That's where it really goes to.
One of the things that struck me when I was watching the video of the Virginia rally, and it struck me because the sheriff, and I think like most of his deputies from Grayson County in southwestern Virginia, which happens to be a part of the state where I have a lot of distant relatives, they were there en masse saying over and over to every camera they could find, we ain't enforcing any law that violates the Second Amendment. You can pass whatever law you want in Richmond. We refuse because it's not legal, it's unconstitutional, so forget it. It's dead on arrival. And so where do you think we're going next with this Second Amendment movement? What happens now? We've seen what just happened in Richmond, which got a lot of national attention. What's the direction?
Well, as far as Virginia is concerned, I think we'll have to take a wait and see if the state is going to try to flex their muscle and force the sheriffs and the local government to enforce their unconstitutional gun control laws. I think we'll have to see what happens. I've often said that Virginia is the bellwether for this, to see how far is the state going to push it, because it's very clear to me that they're putting them in a bind. They're trying to say that statutory law, they have to enforce statutory law even when it's against the Constitution, unless a court declares it to be unconstitutional. Well, that goes to the whole thing of, doctrine of judicial supremacy. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to find this anywhere in the founding of our country. If the doctrine of judicial supremacy were true, then why do our constitutional officers take an oath to the Constitution of the United States and to their state? Why did I raise my right hand as an officer of the United States and swear allegiance to the Constitution? If it was true, the Constitution says what the Supreme Court says it is, then they should just take a duty to obey the view of the courts rather than swear an oath to the Constitution. And if we truly believed that judicial supremacy, we would believe that in the Dred Scott case, that African American slaves are properties of their owners and should be returned to them. Say that courts can err, and they do err, and Blackstone said it. Blackstone said the law and the opinion of the judge are not always convertible terms, or one and the same thing, since it sometimes may happen that the judge may make a mistake of the law. This is Blackstone. Mm-hmm. So constitutional officers have a duty to uphold the Constitution. They themselves do. They can't hide behind the court, and the state can't force a constitutional officer to, execute a law that violates the rights of the citizens of Virginia. So I think we got to wait. I think we have to look at Virginia and see what happens. In the meantime, Pennsylvania is taking the cue and say, we're going to be ready for this. And we want to. Our goal is to try to make this a little more organized and have it be GOA's model ordinance for Pennsylvania. And so things are very well defined. What is an unlawful act? What's going to be enforced? What's not going to be enforced? So that's what's in our ordinance.
So if I'm in Pennsylvania, we're broadcasting now from up in Northeast Pennsylvania. If I'm in Pennsylvania, I'm listening to this, I'm fired up, I want to get involved, I want to be on the ground floor of this, protect the Second Amendment. How do I find you guys? What do I do? How do I contact you? How do I get involved?
Yeah, that's good. Good question. So the best way is to go to Facebook. We have everything on Facebook at one page, and the title of that page is Pennsylvania Second Amendment Sanctuary Ordinance. It's Pennsylvania's Second Amendment Sanctuary Ordinance. Be careful, there's another couple pages that are similar to that name. That's the one you want to look at, and it goes by the moniker of PA Gun Sanctuary. But just search for Pennsylvania Second Amendment Sanctuary Ordinance, and you can go there. And this is truly a grassroots movement throughout the Commonwealth. We have thousands of people involved with it now. And we welcome anyone interested in protecting their constitutional rights to come to the page.
So they can find information, and then they can find whatever in terms of contact and getting hooked up with
in their counties, right from that page, yes.
Fabulous. Val, thank you very much for making the time to talk to us about something I think is incredibly important. And thank you for listening. We'll talk to you next time on Ground Truth.